Public. I kept forgetting what the P was. All right, welcome everybody, and welcome back to those of you who have been faithful fans of this program for the entire season. It's nice to have gotten to know you guys gradually over the course of this whole program. Again, my name is Taryn McGinnis. I'm the manager of the education department here, and this is a lecture that is co-sponsored by Marineland and by the Guantanamo-Matanzas National Estuary Research Reserve. And the whole point of this kind of partnership program is to get folks together who may individually be fans and followers of one or the other facility, but maybe didn't know about the other one, and get us to sort of start unifying our network and our army of folks who have at least one thing in common, and that is that they believe in protecting this planet and learning a little bit more about the science that we need to know to do that better. So thank you for being a part of that over the season. This is the last lecture of the season, so we take the summer off, and then we will be starting up again in September. And if any of you have brilliant ideas for speakers, or if you yourself would like to speak, it is very much just Kenneth, who is not here today, but he's the representative from the GTM NER, and myself, who we just reach out to folks that we know in the community, and now we know you, so you count as well. So if anybody would like to talk to me later about a good idea for a speaker, we're starting to put together the 2017-18 season right now. A couple of just logistical things for those of you who have not been here before. Welcome to our classroom. This room in a couple weeks will house many, many little summer campers. This time of year we house lots of school kids doing field trips. My point is mostly this is a very casual space that normally has children doing who knows what in here, which means you can definitely relax and drink your drinks and do what you need to do, because all kinds of craziness has happened in this room before. If over the course of the lecture you need a restroom break or to take or make a phone call, you can just step outside either one of these doors. Restrooms are to your right and on the right, and you can just step outside here if you need to make a phone call. Please do put your phones on silent. And if you do step outside, please stay closer to the building than to the dolphins, just so no overly cautious volunteers or dolphin trainers come descending upon you, but just hanging out right out here is fine. When the presentation is over and you have asked and gotten all your questions answered, we'll walk, sort of as we came in, we'll walk together in one big group back out. But this time we're just going to walk you just to the other side of the dolphin habitats, and there we will leave you. And so, like I said, you are more than welcome to stick around for as long as you'd like. We've got lots of staff out there who would love nothing more than to talk to you about some of the research that we're doing here, different kinds of programs that we offer here. The other thing I will tell you, and this is for you guys specifically, it has not been true for past lectures, but we are doing shark health assessments today. So the shark habitats were, you didn't look at them because you followed the rules, but they were right up there by the gift shop when we first walked out. We've got 12 sand tiger sharks that are part of a shark reproduction program, and 4 different aquariums are involved in this research program. So there's a lot of veterinarians and aquarists and researchers down there doing ultrasounds on the sharks and taking blood samples, and it's right out in the middle of where you guys can watch. So if anybody's interested in that stuff, I would recommend going up there when we're done, okay? And I think with that, I will introduce our speaker and let her take it away. This is Emily J Murrey, and she is here with the Florida Public Archaeology Network. We're gonna be talking today a little bit about citizen science. Those of you who came to the lecture at the end of last year and we talked about the right whale volunteer program, we talked a lot about citizen science there. This is going to be another citizen science kind of a presentation, but this time we're talking a little bit about the conservation of culture in the form of archaeology, and maybe a little bit of the overlap of the way that and conservation of environmental areas overlaps. And so we're broadening our view a little bit today, and very excited to have Emily J Murrey here with us today. So thank you very much, and enjoy.
And thanks for joining us on a lovely Tuesday afternoon. So yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit about how we can help protect and preserve Florida's buried past. So we're going to look at the ways that we can protect it, and then it'll turn into some things you can do at home when you leave here today. So just my stump speech, I do work for the Florida Public Archaeology Network, and we are a statewide nonprofit that works to help protect and promote Florida's buried past. We do this through 3 main work areas: education and outreach, assisting local governments, and assisting the State Division of Historic Resources. So I do everything from summer camps and kid programs to trainings for planners. We do site assessments, and work on special projects with the Division of Historic Resources as well. We do have 8 regional centers across the state, so the idea behind FPAN was no matter where you are, you could pick up a phone and call an archaeologist and ask questions and get some answers. So my office is at Flagler College in St. Augustine. So why protect archaeological sites? I think that's a good first question to ask, when we're talking about trying to save things and conserve things. Why? So what do you think? Yeah.
It's our history.
It's our history. Excellent. Do you have an idea too?
Yeah. The more we know about our history, the better prepared we are for the future.
Yeah. Same thing. Yeah. So it's important to know where we came from. It's important to know about the past. And you guys are already hitting on this, right? We're not just saving these things. It's not just about the artifacts in archaeology. This is the means, how we study the past. But really what archaeology is about the people. The people who lived here before us, the way they interacted with their environment, the way they interacted with each other, and how they might have changed the landscape or how the landscapes might have changed them. And one of the things that I think archaeology can do better than history is to give voice to people who are not in the historic records, right? History is written by the winners, by the rich, by the literate, and a lot of folks are often left out of historic documents. So archaeology can help us fill in some of these holes and these gaps and learn a little bit more about folks that maybe aren't mentioned. So this is just a map of Florida showing all of the prehistoric sites. So these are the sites by the native people, places where the native peoples lived and made tools and threw trash. And you can see we have almost 25,000 sites. And this is old data, so this goes back to 2013. I'm sure we've added several hundred more in the past few years. And this is 14,000 years of people living in Florida and interacting with the environment and making their lives here. And we don't have history, we don't have written records for these 14,000 years. We get them when the Spanish arrived about 500 years ago, but people have been living here far longer than that. And even when we do have some of the historic records, they maybe aren't always as accurate as we think they could be, or did anyone record what they've had for breakfast all week? How many people eat breakfast every day? How big of a part of your life is that? And you aren't leaving a paper trail about it? Come on, right? So we can get at things like that kind of get lost otherwise. So we have people who've been here for 14,500 years, and people are doing more research and trying to push that date back earlier and earlier every day. We do have documented evidence about some of the people that were here when the Spanish arrived 500 years ago. So here's just a couple of the tribes and groups. Does anyone know how many of those groups are left here in Florida today? 0. 0. All of the people that were here when the Spanish arrived, they are gone. So that does not mean that there are not people walking around that have Timucua blood or Ais blood in them. We do see a good bit of integration into the Spanish culture and community, but the people are not living their culture anymore. That culture is long gone. There's a lot of the native folks left for Cuba when the Spanish left in the 1760s. So, I mean, they've even gone from Florida in other ways, but we do see a lot of death through warfare, through disease, a lot of not very good things happening to these populations. So they are all gone. They had oral histories. Right? That's the way that these people would pass along their culture and their history. And so the Spanish broke some of that down, but not a lot of it. So we do have tribes here today. We have the Seminole tribe, we have the Miccosukee and other Muskogee folks, and they have been living in Florida for hundreds of years and definitely have a great claim to the land and are an important part of our landscape. But they are also have a history of displacement. So a lot of these folks are Creek that are getting pushed out of Alabama, out of Georgia. During the Seminole Wars, they're pushed off of their land here in Florida, further south into the swamp. They're displaced even further afield to Oklahoma. So, they are also missing pieces of their history. So archaeologists have been working, more and more with folks like the Seminole tribe to try to uncover some of the places from their past. Maybe they have stories about somebody, one of the villages when they were in Gainesville. but archaeologists are able to go find that on the landscape and show them exactly where it was, or fill in pieces and gaps in their history. So it can help us give voice to those folks. A whole different population, the enslaved peoples who were brought over here from Africa. They're not written about in the historic documents except as property, and that's not a we're not learning anything about them, right? So we can go to places like Kingsley Plantation, and we can do archaeology at the cabins where they lived, and we can learn about their beliefs, about what they ate for dinner. We've learned they had locks on their doors and firearms at Kingsley, so some pretty interesting archaeology there. These are images of different artifacts that represent the African traditions and beliefs that they brought with them from the various places that they came from. It's a chicken burial that we think would have been put underneath the cabin to kind of bless the construction of the building. Blue beads have some significance in some African cultures, so we're able to get little pieces of information about their lives. Archaeology can help us understand Florida. Florida's the last frontier here in the United States. I don't think it's quite, some would argue it's maybe not even tamed yet, but it definitely took until air conditioning for major population shift down here. So we're still out in the swamps and the forest and learning about new species and new plants and animals. And archaeology can help us understand how people were using these in the past and help rediscover some of this information. So this is American Beautyberry, and I have this growing in my backyard. I'm sure lots of folks recognize this plant. The leaves, if you crush them and rub them on your skin, have been found to be more effective than DEET at repelling mosquitoes, gnats, flies, ticks even. So pretty amazing plant. And I think it's the Army did a bunch of research and figured out how to replicate whatever chemical was released from the leaves to start mass production of better, less caustic, deep burns, man. It's some gnarly stuff. So this is a little safer for your skin and probably more effective. This is elderberry, and they have known medicinal uses for things like sinuses and allergies, but we found a mortuary pond in Titusville, Florida called Windover, and the bodies were so well preserved that they had stomach contents. So there was a woman, and they found thousands and thousands of elderberry seeds in her stomach. So we can explore, I don't think she was eating all of that at the end of her life for sinus issues. So there's something more that elderberry can do with us. So we can, learn about these things and help ourselves. Sea level rise, changing coastal environments. This is something that we're faced with, and we're trying to figure out how to plan for it. And this is something that's happened in the past. We've had periods of dramatic sea level rise, of sea levels dropping, of it incrementally coming up. So how did people in the past adapt to that? How did the landscape change? How did the environment change? At one point we had open grasslands and savannas and elephants, basically. We had mammoths and mastodons running around and grazing. So what impacts could future change have on us? How can we take strategies from the past and help ourselves plan for the future? And I think it can help us understand more about ourselves than we realize. I'm from the South. I grew up eating okra and sweet potatoes. I play the banjo. These are all things that we've adopted from Africa, right? And without realizing that. I didn't know okra was from Africa. That's just what I had on Sunday, Sunday dinner. That's what you eat. So we can learn about ourselves, about our cultures, and how they came to be what they are. These are headlines from the news. The Dakota Access Pipeline. Why are people so upset about that? Well, if we look at history and archaeology, we can see this whole through line of the way that Native populations have been treated and interacting with the colonial governments, with the U.S. government. And there's a lot of history there to unpack and to realize exactly why it came to this. In New Orleans, they've started removing the Confederate monuments in the dead of night without warning to tell anyone when it is. The folks are wearing body armor and helmets and masks. Why is that such a, why are they getting death threats about this? Where does this start in our history? So looking back into the past and trying to figure out how we got to this. So Dr. Ken Sassman is a professor at the University of Florida, and he gave a lecture. He works a lot looking at environmental changes in the St. Johns River and on Cedar Key. And he said, this is not a direct quote, kind of paraphrase, but something to the effect of, we should see archaeological sites not as an archival record, not as this static, here's what happened in the past, but as possible futures past. So we should look to the past to figure out what could happen, where we could be going, how were people interacting in the past, how did they sort out their problems, how did they deal with these changes in the environment. So there's a lot to learn from the past, so it's important to protect it and to learn from it. So that leads us to all of these buzzwords, right? Conservation and preservation and restoration and preserving the past and protecting it, right? So what does all this mean for archaeology? And it does get interesting, especially when I go talk to some of my environmental scientist friends, and these all have very distinct meanings. And I think in archaeology, we talk mostly about preserving things. We want to keep them as they are. Archaeological sites are non-renewable resources, so that means we have this site, and once that site is gone, there is no restoring it. There's no restoration that can happen. We can't take it back to what it was. So we tend to try and keep things as they are and try to protect them, either in situ or at least protect that information that comes from it. So looking at the ways in which we have worked towards this in the past, I think the first big thing that happens in terms of protecting cultural resources nationally is the American Antiquities Act in 1906. So this is a time period where folks are getting nervous. We have a lot of Western expansion that's happening, and people are finding sites like Chaco Canyon and these, amazing stone ruins out west, and they're seeing them get destroyed. They're seeing people go and take artifacts and remove them and sell them globally, and people don't want that to happen. So they press for something, and this is what we get. And it says that the President of the United States can set aside land for specifically if it has cultural significance or historic significance, and it does include environmental and scientific research, but it's noteworthy because it's explicitly for these historic sites. So the first place that's turned into a monument is the Devil's Tower, and then we see Chaco Canyon in 1907. And this act is still being used. It was still used last year. President Barack Obama set aside Bears Ear National Monument through this act. So it's still relevant and useful and noteworthy, and helping us save important resources. We see the National Park Service come a few years later, and the Antiquities Act saves the land, but it doesn't really create a stewardship program for it. So the National Park Service is really important because they become the caretakers of a lot of these sites and help protect them and help facilitate the public going and enjoying them and interpreting the history or the environmental side of it. So we are lucky to have 9 places that the national parks are stewards. We have 2 national seashores, a couple historic sites, some that are just national parks. They have all these different phrases for the types of parks there, but and all of these have important historic sites, important archaeological sites. We have several forts, the Dry Tortugas, Gulf Island Seashore, and of course the 2 we have in town. Canaveral National Seashore has the tallest shellman on the East Coast. It's about 30-something feet tall. It used to be even taller. It was used as a navigational aid for all of the sailors going back to the 1500s. And Biscayne National Park is really cool because it's, I would say, like 90% of it's underwater. So they explicitly wanted to protect the shipwrecks that were there because it's a huge part of the history of South Florida are all the shipwrecks, and they actually have a lot of them open to the public. They have like mooring balls, so you can go out on your boat and go diving on them. So encourage everyone to go visit and enjoy. And the Florida Park Service is not far behind. We have hundreds and hundreds of state parks here, and there has been archaeology conducted in all but one of these parks, and I need to track down which one it is, and we need to go do some archaeology there so we can claim all of them. But a lot of these do focus on, and around archaeological sites. So Huntington Island State Park is a huge shellman's all over that island. Bulow Plantation is the sugar mill ruins. So This is us out at Tomoka State Park doing some archaeology. We were getting information about the soils to see what parts of the landscape were manufactured by humans and what parts were the natural relic dune fields. So archaeology is happening in the state parks all the time, and it's there. So that's kind of one frame of mind for protecting archaeological sites, is we're going to set the land aside and we're going to leave them alone and leave them in situ, leave them in place, and not disturb them. But there's another line of thought that happens probably more often these days than we realize, and this is the idea of preservation by recordation. So if a site's going to get destroyed, we're at least going to collect all that information and save that, and then if the site goes away, the site goes away, but we have that information, we have some of the artifacts from it. And this kind of starts, some of the big projects start with the WPA and the New Deal, and trying to find work for folks. So the Tennessee Valley Authority is going to put in a bunch of dams and essentially flood areas of Tennessee and around the river. And so they send out huge archaeology crews to go and collect that information before these sites are impacted by getting flooded. At that point, I'm sure they realized they didn't think we would ever see them again, right? We didn't have modern diving technology. So they went and collected a lot of information, and there's still boxes of all of this that needs to get sorted through today, but we have it. We have the artifacts and we have the data from the site, the soils and the shells that were found there. So we managed to keep that. We also see the National Historic Preservation Act as another kind of example of this. And this comes from a time period when we have the federal highway system getting built. And it really starts in the realm of preserving historic structures. So this highway system is going to be great because it can connect all the cities and we can get places very quickly and easily. But they also go through the cities, so they end up demolishing a lot of neighborhoods, often the older sections, the poorer sections, and sometimes sections, entire sections where that was the only type of, that was the only place where that architecture was. So all of those houses are now gone. All of those examples of that architecture is gone. So we have the National Historic Preservation Act set out, basically says if projects involve federal funding or are on federal lands, that you have to take into consideration the impact that they're going to have on cultural resources. And this sets up a whole process for how this is going to happen, and it does require things to be shown significant enough for them to really be taken into account. So as much as we'd love to save everything, the first rule in preservation is you can't save everything. So you have to decide what's the most important. So something like a pile of stone debutage for making tools maybe isn't significant. It can't tell us as much about the past as a 6,000-year-old shellman, that has all of these layers, and you can get a snapshot about how life in that area changed through 6,000 years. So, maybe we won't worry about the stone tools, but we'll try to save the shellman. And so this also doesn't mean that the sites are saved as they are. It means that, development and progress can still happen, but we are going to get the information from the sites before we destroy them. So I get phone calls all the time that folks are upset because something's happened and I know there's an archaeology site there and what's going to happen to it. And unfortunately, it can still be demolished, but they're going to sample it and get some information. So it's better than nothing. So this is where a lot of archaeologists work, is we call it compliance and review, so making sure all of these things are met before these projects go forward. In 1879, we also have something called the Archaeological Resources Protection Act that's passed, and this makes it very specifically illegal to remove artifacts from federal land without a permit, and going through basically research design and making sure you're curating the artifacts properly and writing a report and sharing the information. So essentially, visitors to national parks can't just take an artifact home with them, and which I think was always the intent of some of these earlier acts, but they got it in writing, very specific. So Florida is very fortunate because we have a lot of these laws mirrored here. So obviously the federal laws count for all federal projects, no matter what state you're in, but it doesn't always. There's not always laws that apply to the state projects or state lands. And we have Florida Statute 267 that sets out the same kind of requirements of that compliance and review process, and also makes it illegal to remove artifacts from state lands. We have a state archaeologist position created in 1865, before a lot of these laws even get passed through. So I think Florida was very forward-thinking and realizing, we have some of the oldest colonial sites, and people are coming here as tourism and bringing in money, and that it's important to kind of protect some of these resources so that we can, if that's the reason they're doing it, then that's fine. Do it so we can save them to make money. That's great. By any means necessary, right? But we continue, we still have a state archaeologist. We've actually added a state underwater archaeologist to the roster. So there's an office called the Bureau of Archaeological Research up in Tallahassee that kind of helps maintain and manage sites across state lands, but also, if you find something on your property, you can call them up and they'll help you out with that as well. Or they'll pass you on to me to help you out with that. And St. Augustine is even more forward-thinking with preservation of these sites. Going back to 1936, they start a national committee for the preservation and restoration of historic St. Augustine. And this is kind of a research, and they're doing like feasibility studies. They see colonial Williamsburg, which had started, and it's kind of portraying colonial life, and they're is becoming this tourist destination. So St. Augustine's like, we should do that here, but with Spanish colonial time period. And so they have kind of like a fact-finding mission. I think a lot of things happen, and it takes them until 1959 until they get back to creating a proper board, preservation board, and the board starts purchasing properties downtown, and unfortunately they start taking down Victorian structures or houses from around the 1900s because it wasn't really historic, enough for them then. But they start doing archaeology when they remove the buildings, and they're looking for evidence of the structures that were there. They're looking for evidence of the people who lived there so they can tell the stories of that. And then they start reconstructing the structures like on the foundations of the original colonial buildings. They start off using the original methods and construction techniques, and then they realize at some point that they can do it for half the time and half the money if they just put cinder blocks up and we can plaster it and no one will know the difference. So we do have some reconstructed out of coquina and tabby, but then they kind of shift. But that's how we have that feel and look of downtown is through this program. And eventually the board does kind of fizzle. It basically ends up getting reorganized into the Historic Architecture Review Board, and then the Archaeology Preservation Ordinance that we have today. So here's Carl Halbert. He's been around for 27 years. He's retiring in September, and they have started looking for his replacement. But he has worked all over the city, and it's once again that idea of, I think I even got the term preservation by recordation from him, because it's a city people are going to build, they're going to keep doing things, but he's at least getting the information before some of these things get disturbed or damaged to the point that we won't be able to know what was there. So I think he's done something like 800 or 900 digs across the city. There are specific archaeological zones, so if you're in one of those zones, then it triggers it and you have to get a permit from him. And if you're not, it doesn't apply. But they've picked kind of the areas where they think would be the most probable based on past surveying and historic documents and such. And there's one other way that sites can get protected, and I think Miami Circle is kind of the best example of this, and then also one that gets the most criticism. So Miami-Dade County and the city of Miami, they do have ordinances that say you have to go figure out what's there before you build. So prime real estate, downtown, on the river, they find this circle, and it's basically these post holes. Miami has this bedrock of limestone, so they've carved these post holes. They find evidence of ceremonial things at the site, and people in the community, start to learn about it. The tribes start to learn about it, and people get upset. They don't want another condo built on top of this site. The site, would have had significance to the native peoples living there. And so they start this huge campaign. They're out with picket lines with signboards. There's letter writing. People are bugging. All sorts of folks in Congress, folks in development, folks in the local area, and they eventually do get the state to purchase the land and put it in. It's a park now, and they have some signage up, and they have a walkway where the circle was, and it gets a lot of criticism because it's downtown Miami real estate. It costs the state a pretty penny to buy this land, to save it, and there's a lot of backlash that we went after one site and we spent all of our money on one site, and we could have bought multiple properties and multiple sites and saved them all for what we did with this one site. And some folks argue this maybe wasn't even the most significant site. Other folks say it is very significant. The other thing that's happened is it's like the only green space in downtown Miami, so people aren't quite using it as we hoped they would. It's in many ways become a dog park, and people aren't always great about picking up after their dogs. So I think the state is working hard to try to deal with some of those issues and try to kind of revamp the interpretation and do something more with it. But I think it's still a great testament. If you can save the site in downtown Miami from development, we can save anything, right? So then that gets us to what can we all go home today and do to help protect these sites? My first suggestion is go visit them, go enjoy them, right? We have these places, the state owns them, the state protects them for the benefit of the public. Some of these laws were put in place that we want to get information about the sites before they're destroyed for the benefit of the public. So if you guys aren't benefiting from it, then it's not working. So I encourage folks to go visit any of the wonderful state parks here in Northeast Florida, or throughout the state. Go visit your national park. They have the Find Your Park campaign, so you can log on and find some great places to visit. But take only photos and leave only footprints. So we want to encourage everyone to be good site stewards when you do visit them. Don't throw trash. Don't let your dogs go and not clean up after them. Don't remove artifacts. So I've said that it is unlawful to do this on publicly owned properties. I would encourage folks not to collect things from privately owned properties. It is with property owner consent, you can do it, but if I take one artifact from a site, then the impact's not that big. But if we all go to a site and we all take an artifact, what's going to be left of that site? Not very much, eventually. So encourage everyone to be good stewards. Become an archaeology advocate. So we've focused a lot more on advocacy. We've been up at the Capitol doing Archaeology Advocacy Day every year for a couple of years. We've been at the City of St. Augustine Commission meetings talking to folks. So, call your legislators, tell them that these things are important to you. We do try to update folks and let them know when there are bills that are coming through. Last year there was one that would allow people to collect artifacts from state submerged bottomlands. Some of the oldest sites we have in Florida are found in springs and rivers, and they're the sites that go back 15,000 years. So we don't think it's a good idea for folks to take artifacts, right? Those are the laws. You're not allowed to do it already. So we've tried to let folks know when things like that are coming up and when to react. But it's also just to build these relationships with your legislators or your city council folks, so that when these issues come up, then they know it's coming. The American Antiquities Act. So it's been around since 1906. It's saved a lot of different places, and there's now a presidential executive order that's saying that we need to reconsider it. We need to reconsider the process for how these sites get saved. And they're looking at the last 20 years of sites that were set aside. So it includes 22 terrestrial sites and 5 underwater marine areas. Bears Ear is on this list of sites that could be, I'm not sure what the outcome could be. They're open in taking public comment about it. So I would encourage you to, there's a website you can log on and you search for the case number, and you can let the folks there know that you think this is, your thoughts about it, your thoughts about the bill and about these conservation lands. A lot of them are out west, so I feel a little far removed from them, but are all good sites. And that all sounds boring though, right? Writing congressmen and making phone calls and showing up at meetings, but it can be fun. So there's a lot of activism and advocacy happening like on Twitter. So the funding for the National Estuary Research Reserves is threatened. There's some potential budget cuts that could go through to NOAA, which is the kind of federal agency that oversees that. And we have 3 National Estuary Research Reserves here in the state of Florida, and they're funded half from this funding from NOAA and half from the state. So if they lose this funding, that's half of their budget, and that's not good. So the Friends of the Reserve have been doing postcard parties. You can get together and write fun postcards, or they have the Twitter campaign, so the hashtag #MyReserveOurCoast. So you can participate in things like that, and once again, go out and enjoy the resources, and while you're there, take a picture and tweet it or Instagram it, or however any of those things you do, and let folks know that you're enjoying them. And the last part is our citizen science program that we alluded to. So we've started Heritage Monitoring Scouts, or HMS Florida, and this is a program we designed keeping in mind coastal changes and sea level rise, and how a lot of our sites around the coast. We've done estimates that up to 35,000 sites could be affected. This includes historic cemeteries, bridges, historic structures, archaeological sites, by 6 feet of sea level rise. So there's a lot of sites that are at risk. Unfortunately, a lot of these things are just abandonment in place. There's nothing we can do for it. But that's kind of the long-term goal. But in the meantime, why don't we go visit them, right? Why don't we go enjoy them? Why don't we go hang out and see them? Some of them are in state parks, so we can get out and see parts of the parks that we don't usually see, which is kind of fun. And in the process, we can collect a little bit of information about the sites, and over time, we'll have a lot of information. And then, if we have to let them go, or they erode into the sea, or whatever happens, then we've done what we could for them. If I take a photograph of 3 artifacts at a site, and you take one of 3, and you take one, and you take one, right? Then all of a sudden, we have a whole assemblage. We have a lot more information about the site, so we really can get good information from this program. And we have had a pilot program with the GTM Research Reserve. We had 4 trainings up at the Environmental Education Center in the northern part of the reserve. And we are moving forward with just kind of quarterly monitoring events. So we're going to be out on the Guana Peninsula and exploring parts of the Guana Wildlife Management area as well, and monitoring sites. State agencies are required to check in on them every year. So we'll go to them this year, we'll go to them next year. Eventually we'll get folks trained up to go to them on their own. And it's pretty fun. This is a photo of Shell Bluff Landing after Hurricane Matthew. And they lost about 4 feet of shoreline with that one hurricane. So this program's already proven to be helpful, because we went out and monitored the site in front of one of the trainings just to kind of test it out and to see what was there. And those were the last photographs that were taken of the site. And it was like a week before the storm hit. And so we have like the before and after, and the impact is pretty great to see, but also kind of scary to see what one storm can do. So with that, I can take questions. I did bring some stickers for the monitoring program. So if you're interested, the website's at the bottom of them, and you can log on and fill out an application. And hope to see you out there monitoring. So. Yes, ma'am.
I'm getting all sorts of emails about the bear.
Mm-hmm.
What are they trying to do there to destroy it?
The executive order is saying that they created the park without buy-in from the local community, and that folks in the local community maybe didn't want it. And so they have opened it up for public comment. And if they get folks saying that they don't want it, they could potentially, knock it off the list and release it back to whatever the land was before. I know the Native American community out there, there's a lot of sacred land for them involved in the national monument, whatever the correct term for it is. So I know that that's not necessarily totally true, that people didn't want it at all. But I think there's a lot of backlash from like hunting communities or folks that use the land in different ways, that they now are not allowed to use the land. But then they've also opened it up to a lot more of the monuments that were made for 20 years. So, and I think if there's cracks in how some of those were created, then there could be cracks in a lot more than just those 27. So,
If, I don't know if this is a question for here or just for us later, but we are always trying to gather information that anybody knows about the Timucua Native Americans here, because we are actually built on a burial ground, and we have old photos of the construction of this facility and skeletons underneath and shell middens, and every time anything hasn't worked out for us, we've said, oh, it's because we're buried on it. Sorry. But one of the things that we did was several of our dolphins are actually named using words from the Timucuan language, which you can order online, little dictionaries, but from what I've understood, it was never a written language, and so there's really not that much known, and I don't even know how much I trust the stuff that we do have, but we would love, I mean, we want to tell that story a little bit better, and there's just very little that we know. So if you happen to be an expert or know somebody doing that,
we have a whole curriculum about the Timucua bring you. So, and there are some, Dr. Aaron Broadwell of the University of Florida is a linguistics, Timucua is like his specialty, so he's been working, so the language was never written down, and the Spanish kind of created a written alphabet for it, and so there's these interesting, they're essentially like religious texts that they were using to convert and bring the Timucua into the Spanish culture. So one page has the story written out in Spanish, and one page has it written out in Timucua. So he's using those texts both as a baseline to decipher more of the language and learn more about the language, but then there's also big discrepancies in how they tell the stories, and so they think there's a lot of kind of cultural things that are written into the Timucua that we can learn more about them. So, yeah. Yes, sir.
What are some of the 15,000-year-old sites?
The Osceola River has a lot, and Waukulla Springs, and Little Salt Springs and Warm Mineral Springs, which are down on the Gulf Coast. We don't have many old sites here in Northeast Florida. We found 2 points, projectile point stone tools from that time period, and both of them, one of them was knocked out of a gopher tortoise burrow, and the other one somebody found on the beach. So there's not as much evidence of it here, but looking at how wide the coastline is, there's going to be a lot of it underwater. So they've found an archaic cemetery, so it dates to about 6,000 to 8,000 years old in the Gulf Coast. And they're working on that, so I think that's going to give folks a lot of good, even just methods of how to go work on these sites, so we can continue to.
So is the 15 where they're finding tools with the animals?
It's Osceola or Waukulla. I mean, and those, they're both pretty, and there's all sorts of sites. There's in the rivers. It's not just like one specific site. Yes, sir.
Is there a convenient listing of archaeological sites that are open to the public that describes them?
So we do keep some of those, like on our website. We try to have places for folks to visit, but I don't think there's like one master list.
Yeah, because there's a lot of sites over in the Crystal River area that have signs and explanations.
Yeah, you could look at the state historic marker. A lot of those are archaeological sites, but some of them are also structures or things that are no longer there, so it might not be a one-for-one. A lot of the state parks, generally are going to have something. So the state parks were founded with the goal of getting places where important things happen in the past. So like battlefields, or like areas that they started purchasing and turning into state parks to begin with. So a lot of the parks do have that kind of historic or archaeological foundation. Yes, ma'am.
Do you have some current information on our most current find when after Nancy with the underneath
The Los Remedios
the one
Cemetery.
downtown.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I have some bits of information. They've been working the background on the site. The city was putting in a utility lines on Charlotte Street, and they encountered human remains that were they'd been disturbed through previous construction, so it was kind of a jumble of broken things, and there weren't quite burials, but then they did finally find in situ burials, and so they decided to put the utility line on the other side of the road, and then they did more work on the other side of the road and found more in situ burials. And then meanwhile, Hurricane Matthew caused a lot of damage to the Fiesta Mall, which is where A18 Aleworks is, and there was a wine shop on the bottom floor that closed. So David White, who owns the building, who is an angel of a man, offered Carl to come in, and I'm ripping up the floorboards anyways to replace it. You can dig underneath the building. So it went from one little area to more and more, and then they started, cutting out the floor joists and making his construction project into a bigger issue and spending more and more time working on the site. But they found more burials in there. Last I heard, they were up to around at least 30 individuals. And these are folks that would date between, the church was there, is it 1584 to 1702. And the church is actually burned several times, and kind of according to the records, it kind of walks further inland. So they found a couple of post holes that would have been an outer wall. And then there's like nothing on the other side of that. So this could potentially be like the oldest section, if that's true that the church is walking inland. So these could be some of the oldest, literally the first colonists selling them. So they've disinterred a number of individuals, and the University of Florida is going to do a study on them and get some information about demographics and like diseases they may have had, or health issues, pathologies, and as well as do some pretty interesting like isotopic analysis. So your teeth are formed when you're a child, and so whatever the environment is that you've grown up in is going to be reflected in your teeth. But your bones essentially like reconstruct every 10 years, so they can compare the teeth to the bones and see if the where the signatures are coming from, and maybe find out where people were coming from. And the Catholic Church has also been very wonderful and instrumental. They really are interested in finding out more about the population.
So it's still an active.
So they have cleared out of the wine shop, and they've put new flooring down, and they've closed all that up. But it's funny, they pulled out, and then the construction guys kept finding more things too as they were working. So, but I think they are now going to go to the sub shop and poke around in there, but they think it's going to be far enough east that they don't expect to encounter any more burials in that portion. And like I say, the folks were disinterred, and they're at University of Florida for a time period to be studied, and they'll be brought back into town and reinterred. So. And that's wonderful information we have from our archaeological ordinance, right? So, all right, well, thanks for joining.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for coming, and cheers to a wonderful summer for everybody. We'll miss you, but we will hopefully see you all back here in September. And our folks are going to go ahead and, and did you want to?
Yeah, if anyone wants a sticker.
Thank you.
Do you want to give me a chunk and I'll do this half of the room?